Hello guys, and welcome to Good Game Nexus.
Today we're reviewing The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, a PlayStation 5 release that revisits one of the most talked about games of the last console generation. This isn't a remake, and it's not a reinvention of the original design. Instead, it's a technically enhanced version of a game that already set a high bar for narrative-driven action experiences. What makes this remastered release worth examining is not just the performance upgrades, but how those upgrades affect the moment-to-moment feel of gameplay, the pacing of encounters, and the overall player experience. For returning players, the question is whether these improvements justify another playthrough. For newcomers, the question is whether this is the definitive way to experience the game. This review is focused on clear analysis, and it does contain spoilers. We'll talk about how the game plays, how it feels over long sessions, where it succeeds, and where it can still be frustrating or divisive. There's no dramatic framing here, just a grounded breakdown of what this game has to offer, and where it may not work for everyone. Developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment, the game was originally released on June 19, 2020, with a remastered version launching on January 19, 2024, exclusively for the PlayStation 5. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is a third-person action-adventure game with strong survival and stealth elements. The camera stays over the shoulder, emphasizing close-quarters combat, environmental awareness, and deliberate movement, rather than speed or spectacle. The game is structured as a linear narrative experience with semi-open environments. Players are guided through a clearly defined story path, but individual levels often allow freedom in how encounters are approached. It's not an open-world game, and it doesn't attempt to be one. Its focus is on controlled pacing, authored encounters, and narrative continuity.
At its most basic level, the gameplay loop consists of exploration, scavenging, crafting, stealth engagement, and combat. Players move through the environments carefully, searching for supplies like ammunition, crafting materials, and upgrading components. These resources are intentionally limited, and scarcity is a constant design consideration. Exploration is not optional filler. It directly feeds into survival. Skipping rooms or rushing encounters often leads to fewer resources later, which increases difficulty and pressure in future sections. This creates a slow, deliberate pace that encourages observation rather than constant forward momentum. Crafting plays a central role. Items such as health kits, silencers, explosives, and distraction tools are created from scavenged materials. Because resources are shared across multiple crafting options, players are frequently forced to make trade-offs. Crafting a weapon upgrade might mean not having a healing item later, and those decisions tend to matter. This loop repeats throughout the game, but the context and intensity change depending on enemy type, environment, and story progression. One of the most immediate strengths of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is how grounded the movement feels. Character animations are weighty, deliberate, and closely tied to player input. There's a clear sense of physicality when moving, crouching, going prone, or transitioning between actions. On PlayStation 5, responsiveness is improved. Input latency feels reduced, and transitions between actions, such as dodging into a counterattack or moving from prone to a sprint, are smoother and more reliable. This matters because combat scenarios often demand quick reactions in confined spaces. The addition of prone movement remains one of the biggest mechanical evolutions from the first game. Going prone allows players to hide in tall grass, crawl under objects, and approach encounters from new angles. It significantly expands stealth options and encourages players to think in 3 dimensions rather than just horizontal cover. Traversal mechanics like vaulting, squeezing through gaps, and climbing are context-sensitive and fluid. While traversal is largely automated, it rarely feels restrictive, and animations help maintain immersion rather than interrupt it. Combat in The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is built around tension rather than empowerment. The game is not designed to make the player feel powerful. Even when fully armed, encounters remain dangerous, unpredictable, and often chaotic. There are 3 primary combat pillars: stealth, ranged gunplay, and melee combat. These systems overlap constantly, and most encounters shift between them dynamically. Stealth is often the preferred approach, especially on higher difficulties. Silent takedowns, distraction tools, and environmental cover allow players to thin enemy numbers before open conflict begins. However, stealth is rarely perfect. Mistakes are common, and the game is designed to escalate rather than reset encounters. Gunplay is deliberate and weighty. Weapons have noticeable recoil, reload times are slow, and ammunition is limited. This discourages reckless shooting and reinforces careful target prioritization. Headshots are effective but risky, especially under pressure. Melee combat is brutal and personal. Dodging, timing, and positioning are critical, and fights often feel desperate rather than cinematic. Animations emphasize struggle rather than skill, reinforcing the game's grounded tone.
Enemy behavior is one of the standout elements of the gameplay experience. Human enemies communicate with each other, call out player positions, react to fallen allies, and adapt to changing situations. If you're spotted, enemies don't simply rush forward, they flank, retreat, and reposition. Infected enemies behave differently depending on type. Some rely on sound, others on movement, and each demands a different approach. Mixing enemy types within the same encounter forces players to constantly reassess priorities rather than relying on a single tactic. Encounters are designed to feel unpredictable. Even when replaying sections, slight changes in AI behavior can significantly alter how a fight unfolds. This variability adds replay value and prevents encounters from feeling scripted or mechanical.
Levels are carefully constructed to support multiple playstyles. Open interiors, vertical spaces, and environmental hazards create opportunities for creative approaches. Windows, doors, crawl spaces, and destructible elements allow players to reposition during combat. Importantly, levels rarely funnel players into a single solution. While the destination is fixed, the path and method are flexible. This design supports experimentation and reinforces player agency within a linear narrative structure. Environmental storytelling is present, but understated. Visual details provide context without interrupting gameplay, allowing players to absorb world-building information organically.
One of the most important design strengths is that stealth and lethal approaches are both viable, but neither is universally optimal. A stealth-focused playstyle emphasizes patience, positioning, and environmental awareness. Going prone, using grass for concealment, and isolating enemies quietly can dramatically reduce risk. However, stealth often requires time and planning, and the game frequently introduces variables that disrupt perfect execution. Unexpected patrols, limited sightlines, or audio cues that force movement. A more aggressive approach relies on decisive gunplay and quick repositioning. This style can be effective in smaller encounters, but it rapidly depletes resources. Ammunition scarcity is balanced so that full combat dominance is rarely sustainable across multiple encounters. What's important is that the game doesn't punish either approach outright. Instead, it pushes players to adapt. A stealth plan might collapse into a firefight, or a firefight might require a quick escape and return to stealth. That fluid transition is where the combat system is at its strongest.
Encounters are rarely static. They escalate in layers. An initial stealth phase often gives way to alert enemies, followed by flanking behavior, reinforcements, or the introduction of additional enemy types. This layered structure keeps encounters from feeling predictable and discourages repetition. The game also avoids traditional checkpoint abuse. While checkpoints are frequent enough to prevent excessive frustration, they're placed in a way that preserves tension. Failure doesn't always reset the encounter cleanly, and replaying sections can feel just as stressful the second time due to AI variation. This design makes success feel earned, but it can also feel exhausting. Long combat sequences demand sustained focus, and there are few moments where the game allows players to disengage completely.
Enemy AI is designed not just to challenge mechanically, but psychologically. Human enemies communicate in real time, calling out names, positions, and warnings. This has two effects. First, it provides practical information about enemy movement. Second, it humanizes opponents in a way that increases tension and discomfort. Enemies react dynamically to player behavior. If you're spotted, they become more aggressive. If you retreat, they search cautiously.
If you hide for too long, they coordinate sweeps. These behaviors create pressure even when no direct combat is happening. Infected enemies add a different layer of stress. Their reliance on sound or movement forces players to consider how actions like sprinting, reloading, or breaking glass can escalate encounters unintentionally. Mixing infected and human enemies in the same space increases complexity and reduces predictability.
Resource management is a constant concern, and over time it becomes a defining part of the experience. Crafting materials are deliberately limited, and the game often provides just enough resources to survive rather than thrive. This forces frequent decision-making: heal now or save materials, upgrade a weapon or craft a tool, take a risk or play it safe. What's notable is how these decisions compound over time. A poor choice early in a chapter can make later encounters significantly more difficult. Conversely, cautious play can ease future pressure but slow overall pacing. This creates what could be described as decision fatigue. The game demands attention not just in combat, but between encounters. For some players, this adds depth and immersion. For others, it can feel mentally draining, especially during longer play sessions.
Difficulty settings dramatically affect how the game feels. On lower difficulties, enemies are more forgiving, resources are more plentiful, and encounters are more flexible. This makes the game accessible and reduces frustration, but also reduces tension. On higher difficulties, enemy perception increases, resources become scarce, and mistakes are punished quickly. The game transforms into a slower, more methodical experience where patience and restraint are essential. What sets this system apart is the ability to customize individual difficulty elements. Players can adjust enemy awareness, resource availability, and combat damage independently. This allows for fine-tuning the experience rather than forcing a one-size-fits-all challenge. This customization is especially valuable given the game's length and intensity. It allows players to maintain engagement without hitting a frustration wall.
Over extended play sessions, pacing becomes one of the game's most debated elements. Combat encounters are intense and often lengthy. Exploration segments are slower and quieter, but still demand attention due to environmental hazards and limited resources. Narrative moments frequently interrupt gameplay, shifting focus from mechanics to story. This constant shift between tension and quiet can be effective, but it also contributes to fatigue. The game rarely allows extended moments of relief. Even downtime is often framed with anticipation rather than comfort. This pacing is deliberate, but it's also polarizing. Players looking for sustained action may find the experience slow. Players looking for a lighter tone may find it emotionally and mechanically exhausting.
From a systems perspective, the game supports replayability through difficulty variation, alternate playstyles, and improved performance on PlayStation 5. Encounters can play out very differently depending on approach, even if the environments remain the same. However, replayability is limited by narrative weight. While mechanically satisfying, the emotional and tonal heaviness may discourage frequent replays for some players. This makes the game feel more like a carefully structured experience than a sandbox. It's something many players will fully engage with once, rather than repeatedly revisit. The story is set several years after the events of the first game. It follows a grounded, character-driven structure rather than a large-scale plot about saving the world or changing the state of society. The focus is narrow and personal, centered on individual motivations and the ripple effects of past actions. Rather than escalating the stakes through spectacle, the narrative escalates through personal loss, moral conflict, and shifting perspectives. The scope remains intimate even as the journey spans multiple locations. This approach keeps the story focused, but it also limits flexibility. Players are taken through a specific emotional and narrative path with little room for interpretation in terms of outcome, only in how they emotionally respond to it.
Character development is central to the experience. The story spends significant time exploring motivations, internal conflict, and relationships. This is done through extended cutscenes, in-game dialogue, environmental storytelling, and playable sequences that reinforce perspective. The game places heavy emphasis on empathy, not necessarily approval, but understanding. Players are asked to engage with characters whose decisions may feel uncomfortable or frustrating. This design choice is intentional, but it is also one of the most divisive aspects of the game. Some players will appreciate the depth and nuance, while others may feel disconnected due to a lack of agency in narrative direction. The game rarely offers clear moral validation, instead presenting actions and consequences without overt judgment.
One of the most notable aspects of the narrative design is its structure. The story is not told in a strictly linear or singular perspective. Instead, it shifts focus over time, recontextualizing earlier events and encouraging players to reassess their understanding of the story. This structural choice is ambitious and thematically consistent, but it comes with trade-offs. Shifting perspective can disrupt narrative momentum, especially for players who are deeply invested in a particular character or storyline. From a design standpoint, the structure reinforces the game's themes. From a pacing standpoint, it can feel uneven. Some sections move slowly to establish context, while others escalate quickly, creating tonal imbalance.
Thematically, the game explores violence, consequence, and the cycle of retaliation. Rather than presenting violence as empowering, it consistently frames it as costly and corrosive. The emotional direction is restrained rather than dramatic. The game avoids exaggerated emotional cues, relying instead on subtle performances, quiet moments, and prolonged tension. Music is often minimal or absent during key scenes, allowing silence to carry weight. This restraint enhances realism, but can also feel emotionally heavy over long stretches. The game rarely offers relief or levity, which contributes to its reputation as a difficult experience, not mechanically, but emotionally.
Pacing is one of the most commonly discussed issues. The story is long, and its deliberate pacing means that progress can feel slow, especially during sections focused on character development rather than plot advancement. Extended flashbacks, reflective moments, and slower traversal sequences are used to build emotional context. For players invested in the characters, this adds depth. For others, it can feel like unnecessary delay. The game prioritizes thematic consistency over momentum. This makes the experience cohesive, but it also means the story demands patience and attention.
Player agency in the narrative is limited. While players control moment-to-moment gameplay decisions, the story itself is fixed. There are no branching paths, alternate endings, or meaningful narrative choices. This lack of narrative agency is a deliberate design decision. The developers clearly intended to tell a specific story in a specific way. Whether that approach works depends largely on player expectations. Players looking for choice-driven storytelling may feel constrained. Players open to a more authored narrative may appreciate the clarity and focus.
From a technical and performance standpoint, the storytelling is exceptionally polished. Voice acting, facial animation, and cinematic direction are consistently high quality. Dialogue feels natural, and performances carry emotional nuance without relying on exaggerated delivery. The narrative's willingness to challenge players and avoid easy resolutions is commendable. It treats its audience as capable of engaging with complex themes without simplification.
The same elements that define the story's ambition also create its weaknesses. The structure can disrupt engagement, pacing can feel uneven, and the emotional weight can become overwhelming. Additionally, the lack of player agency in the narrative may alienate players who prefer interactive storytelling with meaningful choice. These issues don't negate the quality of the writing or performances, but they do limit the story's accessibility and broad appeal. From a visual standpoint, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered represents refinement rather than reinvention. The original release was already considered one of the best-looking games of its generation, and the remastered version focuses on improving clarity, stability, and consistency rather than dramatically altering the art direction.
Character models benefit from higher resolution textures and improved facial detail. Skin shading, eye movement, and subtle expressions are more readable, particularly during close-up dialogue scenes. These improvements don't change performances, but they enhance how clearly emotions are conveyed. Environmental detail is sharper across the board. Surfaces show more texture definition, foliage density is improved, and distant objects hold detail better during traversal. Lighting is one of the most noticeable upgrades. Indoor environments, especially those with mixed light sources, look more natural with improved shadow depth and contrast. The overall presentation feels cleaner and more stable than the original, especially during fast movement or combat-heavy sequences. While returning players may not immediately notice drastic changes, extended play makes the visual improvements easier to appreciate.
Audio remains one of the strongest pillars of the experience. Voice performances are consistently high quality, with natural delivery that supports the game's grounded tone. Conversations feel authentic, with subtle shifts in tone and pacing that reinforce character relationships. Sound design plays a critical role in gameplay. Footsteps, weapon handling, enemy callouts, and environmental noises are not just atmospheric, they provide actionable information. Players often rely on audio cues to track enemy movement, identify threats, and plan positioning. Music is used sparingly and deliberately. Rather than constantly underscoring action, it appears at specific narrative moments to support emotional beats. In many combat and exploration sequences, silence or ambient sound takes priority, increasing tension rather than releasing it. The balance between sound effects, dialogue, and music is carefully managed, ensuring nothing overwhelms the experience.
Accessibility is one of the areas where this remastered version continues to stand out within the industry. The game includes extensive accessibility options covering visual aids, audio cues, control remapping, navigation assistance, and combat adjustments. These options allow players to tailor the experience to their needs without compromising the core design. Difficulty customization goes beyond preset modes. Players can independently adjust enemy awareness, resource availability, damage values, and stealth effectiveness. This makes it possible to fine-tune challenge rather than simply choosing between easy or hard. As a result, the game is accessible to a wide range of players, from those seeking a more narrative-focused experience to those looking for intense, punishing gameplay.
From a technical standpoint, the remastered version is stable and polished. Frame rates are consistent, load times are significantly reduced, and overall responsiveness is improved compared to the original release. Long sessions reveal very few technical issues. Bugs are rare, and performance remains steady even during complex combat encounters or densely detailed environments. Transitions between gameplay and cutscenes are seamless, reinforcing immersion. This level of polish reflects years of post-launch refinement and optimization. While the original version was already technically strong, the PlayStation 5 hardware allows the experience to run more smoothly and consistently.
Immersion remains one of the game's defining qualities. Visual fidelity, sound design, animation quality, and level design work together to create a believable and cohesive world. The game does a strong job of maintaining tension through limited resources, unpredictable encounters, and deliberate pacing. Even quiet moments are framed with anticipation rather than relaxation. However, this immersion comes at a cost. The emotional weight, slow pacing, and sustained tension can be exhausting over long sessions. This is not a game designed for casual or fragmented play. It demands focus and engagement from start to finish. The remastered edition includes additional content that enhances replay value, most notably the roguelike style No Return mode. This mode focuses on combat encounters with randomized elements and character selection, offering a more mechanically driven experience separate from the main narrative. While this mode does not redefine the game, it provides a meaningful alternative for players who enjoy the combat systems but don't want to replay the full story. It highlights the depth of the mechanics without the narrative weight. Replayability overall remains limited by the game's tone and length.
While systems support multiple playstyles, the narrative intensity may discourage frequent replays for some players.
Pros and cons summary. Pros: deep, flexible combat systems, strong enemy AI and encounter design, high-quality visuals and animation improvements, exceptional sound design and voice acting, industry-leading accessibility options, stable performance and technical polish. Cons: slow and deliberate pacing may not appeal to all players. Narrative structure can feel uneven. Emotional tone is consistently heavy. Limited narrative agency. Final verdict. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered delivers a refined, technically polished version of a demanding and divisive game. Its strengths lie in its combat design, presentation quality, and accessibility features, all of which benefit from PlayStation 5 hardware. This is a game best suited for players who value narrative-driven experiences, methodical gameplay, and high production quality. It rewards patience, attention, and emotional engagement. Players who prefer fast-paced action, lighter storytelling, or open-ended player choice may find the experience restrictive or exhausting. As a remastered release, it succeeds in presenting the most stable and complete version of the game to date. Whether it's the right experience for you depends less on technical quality and more on whether its deliberate pace and heavy themes align with what you want from a game.
That's our review of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. If this analysis helped, leave a comment with your thoughts on the game and subscribe for more in-depth gameplay reviews. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.